While stress and frustration may sound like superficial problems or complaints, the Buddha identified them as the core of so much of our unnecessary or created suffering. I was reminded of what the Dalai Lama had said on our first day. We cannot end natural disasters or the suffering they cause, but so much of the rest of our suffering we can. Dukkha, for suffering, is the opposite of sukha, which means happiness, ease, or comfort. Both words are said to have originated from the ancient Aryans who brought the Sanskrit language to India. These Aryans were a nomadic people who traveled by horse or ox-drawn carts, and the words literally mean having a bad, or good, axle. Was it a bumpy ride, dukkha, or a smooth ride, sukha? Not a bad metaphor for life. What is suffering but a bumpy ride? Every life is rutted, and no one can avoid some inevitable bumps, but so much is determined by our own perception of the ride. Our mind is the axle that often determines whether we experience the ride as bumpy or smooth. This point was brought home to me in a rather literal way when I went to Dharamshala in January, several months before the dialogues with Peggy Callahan. Peggy was responsible for filming the week in Dharamshala, and we went to prepare for the April visit. Our return flight from the cloud-covered Dharamshala airport was cancelled, so we embarked on a bumpy and winding expedition to the nearest airport, holding tightly to the hand straps in the car as we bounced up and down and were tossed from side to side. We tried hard not to get carsick, and distracted ourselves by telling each other humorous stories from our travels, stretching each story as long as possible during the bone-shaking 6-hour journey. We have perceptions about our experience, and we judge them. This is good, this is bad, this is neutral, the Dalai Lama explained. Then we have responses: fear, frustration, anger. We realize that these are just different aspects of mind. They are not the actual reality. Similarly, fearlessness, kindness, love, and forgiveness are also aspects of mind. It is very useful to know the system of emotion and to understand how our mind works. When a fear or frustration comes, we have to think, what is causing it? In most cases, fear is simply a mental projection. When I was young and lived in the Potala, there was an area that was very dark, and there were stories about ghosts there. So when I was passing through this area, I would feel something. This was completely a mental projection. No, the Archbishop said with a frightened face. There were ghosts there, man. The Dalai Lama laughed and said, when a mad dog approaches, barking and gnashing its teeth, then you need fear. That's not a mental projection. So you have to analyze the cause of the fear. With frustration, often you see someone and you have a mental projection even when his or her face is neutral. Similarly, when you see someone's actions, you have a mental projection even when their behavior is neutral. So you have to ask yourself if your frustration is based on something real. Even if someone criticizes you or attacks you, then you have to think, why did this happen? This person is not your enemy from birth. Certain circumstances caused this person to be negative toward you. There may be many causes, but usually your own attitude is an important contributing factor that cannot be ignored. You realize that this happened because you have done something in the past that this person didn't like. So then when you realize your own part in the other person's criticizing or attacking you, the intensity of your frustration and anger automatically reduces. Then you also realize that basic human nature is good, is compassionate, and that the person does not want to harm you. So therefore, you see their emotion is due to some misunderstanding or misinformation. You see that this person's actions are due to their own destructive emotions. You can develop a sense of concern, compassion, even feel sorry for their pain and suffering. How sad that this person is out of control or having such a negative feeling. Instead of frustration and anger, you feel sorry for the other person and concern for them. I nodded my head and said, but sometimes our frustration is not dependent on other people but on circumstances beyond our control. For example, we can't control canceled flights. When I was young and very eager to go do something, the Dalai Lama said, then they would announce that there was a delay or cancellation of the flight. I would feel angry and sometimes angry toward the pilot or toward the airline. But there was air service from Dharamshala to Delhi. I would go to the city of Jammu, about 4 hours' drive, to fly. So one morning, all the passengers were on the airplane when they announced that the flight had been cancelled and that everyone should please leave the airplane. Later, I was told that the pilot did not come because he was drinking too much the night before. So everyone was complaining, and I felt frustrated too. Now, when an announcement comes that my flight is cancelled or postponed, which does happen quite a lot here, I take it as a good opportunity to sit and do my practice, to sit and meditate. So now I feel less frustration. I was reminded of a flight that I had been on with Rachel, our then 2-year-old son, Jesse, and my mother to Hawaii. We did not have very much money and had booked seats on the cheapest airline we could find. They had only 2 planes that they would shuttle back and forth to Hawaii and other holiday destinations. We were almost halfway over the Pacific from California to Oahu when I felt a sudden jerk, like someone had shoved the plane from the side. Then the plane made a sweeping turn, and some time later the crew made an announcement that we were heading back to San Francisco. I remember being very angry and confused and frustrated. We had to spend the whole day waiting for another plane, so we tried to begin our vacation in California, taking Jessie to the zoo. It was fun, but I felt angry that our Hawaiian holiday was being cut short. When we finally returned to the airport and got ready to board, I overheard the pilot reveal to another member of the crew the reason for turning around. Apparently one of the bolts had come loose in one of the engines. The pilot casually mentioned, in the way of people who are used to calmly handling high-risk situations, that if they had not shut off the engine at the moment that they did, it would have sheared off and the airplane would have crashed into the ocean. Suddenly a delayed flight and a day at the zoo didn't sound so bad after all. I used to feel very frustrated and angry, the Archbishop said, when we would be rushing to a very important meeting, and we would be stuck in traffic because there was an accident up ahead. You were grinding your teeth and looking for somebody to kick. But growing older, I said, well, this is an opportunity for being quiet. And then you would try to uphold all the people that were involved. I mean, there's not very much you can do, so grinding your teeth and getting heated up doesn't help. So why not use the old things that they tell you? Count to 10. 1, 2, 3. Ah! The Archbishop pretended to lose his temper despite his trying to count to 10. I think it takes time to learn to be laid back, he continued. You know, it's not something that just comes ready-made for you. No one ought to feel annoyed with themselves. It just adds to the frustration. I mean, we are human beings, fallible human beings. And as the Dalai Lama points out, there was a time, we see him serene and calm. Yet there were times when he too felt annoyed, and perhaps there still are. It's like muscles that have to be exercised to be strong. Sometimes we get too angry with ourselves, thinking that we ought to be perfect from the word go. But this being on earth is a time for us to learn to be good, to learn to be more loving, to learn to be more compassionate. And you learn, not theoretically. The Archbishop was pointing his index fingers at his head. You learn when something happens that tests you. And then he was pretending to be speaking as God might. Hello, you said you wanted to be more compassionate. Hello, you wanted to be a little more laid back. We get very angry with ourselves. We think we ought to be supermen and superwomen from the start. The Dalai Lama's serenity didn't come fully formed. It was through the practice of prayer and meditation that the gentleness, the compassion grew, his being patient and accepting within reasonable limits. Accepting circumstances as they are, because if there are circumstances that you cannot change, then it's no use beating your head against a brick wall. That just gives you a headache. This is a veil of growth and development. I was struck by the phrase a veil of growth and development, which seemed to echo the famous Christian notion that life is a veil or valley of tears, from which we are freed only when we enter heaven. This expression is often said to be based on Psalm 84:6, which has the beautiful wording, "Who passing through the vale of tears makes it a well." Indeed, we can use our tears, our stress and frustration, as a well from which we can draw the life-giving waters of our emotional and spiritual growth. It's similar to how we learn how to be a parent, the Archbishop said as he concluded our discussion. You learn how to react to a child who is really frustrating you. You are better with your third child than you were with your first child. And so I would say to everyone, you are made for perfection, but you are not yet perfect. You are a masterpiece in the making.